are and maybe a little bit of background, and then your presentation, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared with the statement to go through my background and right into my findings, if that's okay with you and the committee.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I've been working in the voter data and election administration field since 1996. I've worked building and deploying voter databases for the Republican National Committee, 5 presidential campaigns, and no less than 100 different campaigns and election-related organizations in all 50 states and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I worked for 8 years at the nation's premier redistricting and election administration firm, Election Data Services, where I worked with states and municipalities on voter databases, delineation, and litigation support related to these matters. Also, while at Election Data Services, I worked under our contract with the U.S. Census Bureau, analyzing voting age population. Since 2004, I've worked for my own business, now known as External Affairs, Inc., providing statistical and data analysis for local, state, and federal candidates and policy organizations in the areas of voter targeting, polling, research, fundraising, branding, and online development and strategy. My firm has worked for over 200 candidates from president to town council and over a dozen DC-based policy and advocacy organizations. I started the Voter Integrity Project after the November 3rd election as a volunteer endeavor to apply several methods to pivotal states to determine whether or not potentially illegal ballots have been cast and to discover other anomalies that could impact the outcome of the election. These are our findings from Georgia that I would like to share with you today. 1. From the state's database for the November 3rd, 2020 election and comparing that to the USPS owned and leased facilities report, it is my opinion that 1,043 early and absentee voters ballots were cast by voters who were registered with a postal box disguised as a residential address. For this determination, I had my staff compare the official list of leased and owned postal facilities provided by the United States Postal Service to the list of early and absentee voters' residential addresses. We identified 1,043 voters that listed a postal facility as their physical address, which is contravenes the law in Georgia. In many cases, these residential addresses disguise the PO box number as an apartment or suite number. For example, apartment 5402 when it is in fact PO box 5402, etc. Second, from the state's database and the National Change of Address database and other states' voter databases, it's my opinion that at least 2,312 absentee or early voters were not residents of the state of Georgia when they cast early absentee ballots in Georgia. In conducting this analysis, I took the state's database of all absentee and early voters and matched those voters to the NCOA database. The National Change of Address database, NCOA, is maintained by the Postal Service, and the match process is actually run by the Postal Service itself. This identified 15,700 matches of voters to records who had moved out of the state, permanent NCOAs, not temporary, permanent, to the state prior to Election Day. Further, by comparing the other 49 states' voter databases to Georgia's database, I identified 4,926 voters who registered to vote in another state subsequent to the date that they registered to vote in Georgia. When merging these two lists and removing duplicates and accounting for moves that would not cause an individual to lose their residency in Georgia and eligibility to vote under state law, these voters totaled 20,312. The methodology of using NCOA to identify voters who've moved out of state is backed up by research, specifically an article titled "A Brief Yet Practical Guide to Reforming U.S. Voter Registration Systems," which appeared in Election Law Journal and was co-authored by author Stephen Ansel-Labaheri, the Frank G. Thompson Professor of Government at Harvard, who is widely published and has a PhD in political science. The article recommends the use of the National Change of Address database to identify voters who are quote unquote deadwood because they moved out of the state. From the article, it is possible to develop comparable metrics of list quality and targets for improving voter registration lists. An example of a possible metric is the incidence of deadwood, obsolete records, usually due to a person moving or dying, on active and inactive voter lists using the National Change of Address and other postal lists, information from marketing firms, past vote records, and the National Registration List. Catalyst has identified records that are dead wood. The data revealed that 7.3% of all registrations records in the United States are dead wood. The methodology for matching Georgia voters to out-of-state voters who subsequently registered to vote in another state was done using full, exact name and date of birth. For example, a Matthew Martin Braynard and a Matthew M. Braynard in another state, even if they had the same date of birth, would not have counted as a match for us since it's not an exact name match. Our number for this is likely much higher in reality. Both Georgia and other states, we had difficulty obtaining reliable, accurate dates of birth for all individuals. And since having a full, reliable date of birth was required for the match, there are many voters in this category that we inevitably missed. I would point out that this matching method has also been validated by published research. An article titled ADGN, an algorithm for record linkage using address, date of birth, gender, and name, in Statistics and Public Policy, another journal, also authored by Mr. Anselo Bahari, states the following in his analysis of a database for the state of Texas. Either name or date of birth or name and address identifies nearly all individuals in a database uniquely. 99.6% are unique with date of birth and name. I would also add that according to the official code of Georgia, section 21-2-217A2, registering to vote in another state is specifically indicated as nullifying residency in Georgia and with it, the right to vote. Number 3, it is my opinion that at least 395 individuals in the state of Georgia voted in multiple states, in Georgia and in another state. For this determination, I compared the list of early and absentee voters and compared this list to other states' early and absentee voter lists that were available through the L2 political database. Comparing these two lists by matching on full exact name and full exact birth date revealed 395 individuals who voted both in the state of Georgia and in another state, a clear violation of state and federal law. It should be noted that not all states have published complete lists of their early and absentee votes, and we didn't look at election day voters at all in either comparison. Thus, this analysis was conducted on an incomplete universe of data and represents a minimum number of individuals who voted illegally in Georgia and in another state. The accurate total figure is likely much higher. The number of matches is further reduced by the same lack of accurate and complete dates of birth, both in the Georgia file that was released publicly and in other state files that hamper the identification of subsequent out-of-state registrations. Now, I'd like to quote to you from an article in the New York Times that was published in 2012. Fraud in voting by mail is vastly more prevalent than the in-person voting fraud that has attracted far more attention, election administrators say. The flaws of absentee voting raise questions about the most elementary promise of democracy. Voting by mail is now common enough and problematic enough that election experts say there have been multiple elections in which no one can say with confidence which candidate was the deserved winner. When just combining my findings alone, the number of ballots that are strongly indicated as being illegally cast surpasses the margin of victory in the presidential election, thus making it impossible to know who the deserved winner is in Georgia. Finally, I'd like to make a point about the influence of out-of-state non-residents in your elections, because it's about more than just the outcome of this election. When someone casts a ballot, not where they live, but where they choose to cast it, they are effectively nullifying the Electoral College. Similarly, I'll ask you to recall the great compromise at the founding of this country, that we were to have two federal legislatures, one, the House, composed of representatives based on a state's population, and the other, the Senate, where each state had an equal voice. Out-of-state non-residents voting in your Senate elections also nullifies this founding principle. To the members of the committee, I am eager to answer any and every question you may have about these findings. I do respectfully request that you allow me to answer certain questions about the specifics of these findings after my testimony in current litigation, which I expect to complete within the next few days. You may email these questions to me for a written response, or I'd be happy to answer them via live, over Zoom, over the phone, and under oath. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some questions. Mr. Braynard, if there's something that you can speak to at present, that would be fine. We understand the ongoing litigation. If it is not something, then I would just ask that perhaps you write it down and get that answer back to us at an appropriate time. I going to go back. I believe the first request was from Representative Oliver. You're muted, Representative Oliver.
No, sir, I was asking for the previous witness, not this witness.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got another one up there from you, Representative Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question would be for, with respect to the affidavit on compensation. It's true you're being paid a flat fee of $40,000 for your testimony?
That's what it says in the affidavit. Although to be clear, that was for another legal organization. And the campaign itself isn't paying me anything.
Who paid that $40,000?
Amistad Project. But again, the affidavit's in a case filed by the Trump campaign's legal organization.
On your Twitter bio, I see a link to a Give, Send, Go, which is a crowdsourced funding. And it says that you're raising money for the project that you're testifying about before this committee today. And to date, it's raised $674,696 that it says is going to you. Is that true?
That is, the language is not quite accurate. I'll clarify some of what you said. All the money raised through crowdfunding is not going to me personally. All of it was used to fund this project. In fact, we've created an online spreadsheet detailing every expense that has been paid. Approximately 200,000 of that has been spent on data. Approximately 400,000 has been spent on call centers. And we still have invoices to log. When we reached $580,000, I posted and requested that people that were no longer asking for money, and that any money that comes in, will be dedicated to the project. I said that when we're done with the project, and we're nearing that point now where we will have no more expenses for it, we will offer anybody who donated money to return it to them because we have surplus. If there's any money that's left, sorry, go ahead. Did you? So we'll return money to anybody who asked for it, if given that we will likely have a surplus and that the project didn't cost as much as we received in donations. Any money left over after that will be given to a permanent voter registration, anti-voter fraud effort. And again, that tranche will not go to my pocket personally. It would just be going to pay for other things, but I will not benefit from it personally at all. So we stopped asking for money, and we've had a full public accounting. I'm benefiting not one penny personally from the Give, Send, Go money raised. And that's a promise I made and a promise I'm keeping. Now, attorneys have come to me and asked me to give them my expert, this is what I do for a living. I'm a campaign consultant and an expert in the area of voter data. They want me to sign affidavits, do declarations, interpret things, give them other assistance. I'm more than happy to do that, but that's what I do as a profession. All of the data that I've received, however, or that we've developed through this project has been released at no cost. I have testified at no cost to the project at hearings in Arizona. I've gone to Michigan to testify. I'm testifying to you here today without any compensation. I'm happy to do that. I've turned over data to multiple agencies, including the FBI, including your state government's leaders, your Secretary of State and Attorney General, other states' leadership. And that's been given freely. That's been funded by the public project. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, the one question I think on the updates in conjunction with the Give, Send, Go, you had 32 updates fundraising that you would post on there, and on one of them I read that the vendors you weren't disclosing at their request. Is that right?
Because of the tremendous amount of political heat around this issue, the vendors that I'm working with have specifically asked that they not be named. So we're going to provide their receipts, I guess, but with with key information cropped out, like their wire number, their account number. But I'm also intent, and this is a promise I made, that I would have somebody independent of me audit everything. They would then get access to the vendors, verify that the vendors were paid, that they billed us what they billed us. to make it as transparent as anything. And I'm actually completely open to recommendations on who that auditor or multiple auditors could be to ensure that the money that was raised was spent how I said it was spent, how I promised it would be spent. I'm completely open to that, but I'm in a little bit of between rock and hard place because these vendors, some of whom I've worked with for over 20 years, have been like, please do not put our names up there. Like we put receipts up for Chick-fil-A up there. We don't have a problem with that, or Best Buy, or the other places where we've made incidental purchases. But these major vendors whom we've given, spent basically almost all of the money on, we're very apprehensive about being publicly doxxed.
We have Representative Turner has a question.
Mr. Chairman, I have just one more question to ask, if I might.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. Mr. Braynard, two or three nights ago, you were on an interview with Lou Dobbs on the Fox Business News channel. And in that interview, you said that you were working with Georgia legislators. Who are the Georgia legislators that you're working with?
Your colleagues on this committee who invited me to the hearing.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Braynard, you and I have never had any conversations, have we? We never had.
I don't recall.
Yeah,
I don't recall.
I don't think I heard your name before yesterday. As a matter of fact, I don't watch Lou Dobbs. I'm sorry I missed the interview. But and I really don't understand why it would matter who's paying you if the data can be independently verified. Have you worked with any Georgians who have given you any type of leads? Are there any activists who have come to the forefront that you're aware of, or have worked with, or have told you this is where you need to look?
No, and when other people are bringing different approaches to this, these questions, right? But it was my intent when I started this project that our findings would be geared at nothing that would require any speculation, only hard data that could be easily reproducible by someone else. Anybody, with just a little bit of common sense could actually do an NCOA match on the early and absentee vote. That's easily replicatable. So is the PO box leased and owned facilities. That's all easily replicatable. So we really want to avoid any kind of bias, and that you can decide how you weight certain mathematical formulas, and we didn't do any extrapolations. We did a sample size, so therefore the entire population reflects the same. We never made any of those assertions. I've given names, voter ID numbers, records to other states, etc. Just really concrete things that are I would consider actionable.
So the reason why I asked the question the way that I did was to establish that before your testimony here, I had no idea what you were going to say. And yet earlier today, when Mr. Adams was testifying, I came in to make a very specific comment, and I made a very specific claim that there were some 15,000 people who had change of address forms where their registration didn't match their current address. And that was given to me by two Georgia activists who have been doing data analysis much like yours. And so it really doesn't matter who's funding it. These two guys are doing it because as a passion project, they care about democracy, they care about their country, and they found that there are these problems in the data. And that I said the 15,000 number earlier, and I believe you put the number at 15,700. So I'd say it's in the same ballpark.
I actually hate to interrupt, but I see what you're getting at. You're trying to say that these numbers came at independently, and there's actually a much easier way, to further validate that is that I actually have, when you run the NCOA analysis with the Postal Service, you get a receipt, and I have my receipt. If these gentlemen have their own separate receipts, well,
right.
There you go.
So, yeah. So that reinforces the point that regardless of who's looking at the data is going to say the same thing over and over and over again. And I think it would behoove this committee, especially as they go into the next legislative session, to be looking at that type of data and making sure that when we, as a legislature, give the authority to certain individuals in the legislative branch, that are actually following through with the responsibility that they've been given. One last question, Mr. Braynard, and I do appreciate your time and flexibility in answering questions for the committee. As you mentioned that you have turned over, can you, the results of your findings to law enforcement or to the Secretary of State or other elected officials, has there been any acknowledgement of that receipt? Have you been given any indication as to what action is being taken as a result of you turning that over?
Well, I believe the only confirmation I got was the FedEx package that arrived around noon yesterday was signed for. That's the only confirmation I think I've gotten. I believe that's from the Secretary of State's office. I've sent the data to the Attorney General's office. So I've got no other acknowledgement from it.
How about to the GBI or any other law enforcement agency?
You know, I've not submitted the data to them, but if there's an agency you think in Georgia, the form letter is good to go. The data set's ready to go. It's very easy to understand. And included in all of my submissions is, you know, the open invitation that if any of this is confusing to you or you have questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. You know, I'm happy to help in any way I can to make it clear what these findings are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe Representative Nguyen had a comment or a question.
I do have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Braynard, I did have a chance to read through your affidavit and look at the exhibits that you attached to the affidavit. And you allege that there are individuals who cast invalid ballots, and you believe the claim you're making is within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. So I did take a look at the exhibits you attached, and I do want to share with you some of the things that I found that appear to be incorrect to me. And I'll just address these in orders of the exhibit attached, and I'll just, in the interest of time, highlight the most notable things that I found. The first exhibit attached, Exhibit 2, is a list of folks who were registered to vote in Georgia and have subsequently registered to vote in another state. Right off the bat in your affidavit, you testify that you cleaned up the list for duplicate entries, yet on the very first page of the exhibit, there are 3 duplicate voters. So I am concerned about the duplicate entries that may not have been removed from the exhibits. On that same page, what I did was I just took the first 10 names that were listed that are alleged to no longer be a resident in the state of Georgia. Of those 10 names, I found 8 property tax records that shows the voter still lives at this current address listed under which they're registered in the state of Georgia. They claim homestead exemption on this home as their primary residence, and they pay property taxes on their homes here in the state of Georgia. These are 2020 records that I will be submitting to the committee for review. Of these 10 voters that I researched, I was able to reach 1 voter on the phone. The voter verified that both he and his wife still live at this address in the state of Georgia, and he has only voted in the state of Georgia. He has a lengthy voting history that I was able to pull as well. From this very same list of individuals, 1 individual is alleged to be registered in both Georgia and Arizona. I was able to confirm her registration in Georgia and match her voter registration to a property tax record to confirm that she still holds residency in the state of Georgia as her primary residence. I cross-referenced her with Arizona's database and in fact did find a voter with the exact same name, and they are exactly the same age. However, the voter in Georgia was born January 17th and the voter in Arizona was born on April 17th. The voter also has a very common name, and I subsequently just typed in her full name, first, middle, and last name. In the state of Georgia, 117 people share this name, according to White Pages, and in the state of Arizona, 54 people share this name. There was another similar scenario with another individual on that same list, registered allegedly in both Georgia and Arizona. Same first, middle, last name, but they have different birthdays. They're different ages. One is age 48, one is age 49. The voter in Arizona has not actually voted since 2016. I'm going to move ahead in the interest of time to Exhibit 4. And you mentioned this earlier, voters who, in your affidavit, you allege that voters are using PO boxes to register and disguise PO boxes as their residential address to cast invalid ballots. In this exhibit, I immediately recognize one of the addresses. It's right around the corner from which I live, and I have friends that live in this actual building. It's a condo building with units on top, and it happens to have a FedEx center in the bottom of the condo complex. I reached out to my friend that lives there and informed him that both he and his wife are listed on your exhibit as having committed voter fraud by trying to disguise their residential address as a PO box. He subsequently sent me a list of all the homeowners in that same complex, and I cross-referenced them with their voter registration to confirm they live there. And then I also looked on your exhibit, and every single person that owns a condo in that building that voted in this election has been accused of disguising their residency as a PO box. I found a similar scenario for an address that is also an apartment building with a FedEx center in the bottom of the building. I know exactly where that building is because I have friends who used to live in that apartment complex, and a simple Google search will show you in real time that that is a residential apartment building with a FedEx center underneath it. Now, for those two buildings alone, I've identified at least 70 individuals in the first building that are on this exhibit, having been accused of disguising their residential address as a PO box. And on the second list, there are at least 58 folks that are named for that specific apartment complex. In Exhibit 5, this is the list of people who have alleged to have voted twice, one in the state of Georgia and one in a second state. One of the very first names on that list happens to be our colleague, Representative Tyria Nolowitz's neighbor. So we simply picked up the phone and called Representative Nolowitz, and she called the voter. The voter is alleged to have voted in the state of Maryland and also in the state of Georgia. The individual has confirmed that he currently lives in Georgia and has never voted in the state of Maryland. He, in fact, has not been to Maryland in the last year at all. He does have a father with whom he shares the exact same name, a senior and a junior. In another scenario, I was able to find an individual who allegedly voted in Georgia and also in the state of Virginia. The voters share the exact same name and age, but they have different birthdays. The Georgia voter born June 14th, the Virginia voter born June 2nd. On that same list, I happened to notice that one of the voters—
Representative Nguyen, excuse me, how many more on your list are
This
there?
is my last scenario. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. On the last, one of the voters on my list happened to be my constituent. I attempted to call her, was unable to reach her. So I actually just drove over to her house and talked to her and her husband yesterday afternoon. They've lived in Georgia their entire lives, have lived in that same house since 1985. They've never even been to the state in which they're alleged to have double voted. Earlier, Mr. Adams did testify that there are circumstances in which voters have the exact same name, first, middle, and last name, and the same birthday. Based on what I found, I'm led to believe that many of the names listed on your exhibits are erroneous. And these allegations are very serious allegations. You've alleged that these voters have committed a felony. When I picked up that phone and I called my friend and let him know he was on that list, he and his wife were very surprised to learn that their names have been attached to a federal lawsuit, and there have been no attempts to contact them to verify any of this information. So these voters, in fact, have no idea they're being accused of committing a crime in a public filing where both their names and their addresses are listed. And these voters are both Republican and Democrat. It's not a partisan list. So to be clear, there are many people who have been accused of committing felonies, and there are many common names in these exhibits: Smith, Williams, Johnson, Taylor, Davis, Miller. In some cases, as you admitted earlier, you use birth years, in some cases, birthdays. But did you use any more specific unique identifiers such as social security numbers or driver's license numbers that would have actually been able to prove that these people are not, in fact, the same people?
Okay. Quite a lot of questions there. First of all, I actually want to thank you for helping to raise issues to help better validate the data. It's only with strong scrutiny that we're able to be completely confident in our findings. So to answer some of your questions, first, we never used anybody's just birth year. It was always had to be a complete match. In fact, because the default date for so many birth dates is the first of the month or the first of January, whenever that's those components are missing, we actually excluded everybody that was born on the first of the month or January 1st for any of our matching. Second, you bring up the issue of duplicates. In the total number of 20,300, is it 12, I think, that is a completely dedupe consolidation of lists. While individuals might have had multiple NCOA records, we have a completely unique list of county and voter ID numbers that totals 20,300. Regarding some of the other name issues that you've found and other issues that you've raised, as I mentioned, I'd be more than happy to address all of those. If you'd send them to me, I would give them an additional validation and scrutiny and get back to you on them.
I do have a follow-up question. As you mentioned, you said that you used complete birthdays. Where were you able to obtain those birthdays? Were they, we know that the Secretary of State here in the state of Georgia doesn't provide birthdays. Where did you get those birthdays?
Right, now you've actually made a very good point. Remember, I'm a third party independent of the government. So many of the tools that would be necessary to I would say, catch a lot of the people that we think we've missed and to do further validation, those tools reside solely in the hands of the state government. So the driver's licenses, social security numbers, what I presume would be the state probably has its own list of dates of birth that it's not releasing publicly. It's sort of set up in the scenario that only the state can definitively answer those questions. Now, in my affidavit, I don't believe I specifically accused anybody of committing a crime. I said these were indications over and over again. Potentially illegal ballots has been my language. Indications of illegally cast ballots. I've not accused anybody of committing a felony in any of my affidavits or declarations. But again, many of these tools are only available to the state, and I'd be happy to work with them and give them guidance on how to apply them and to basically prevent illegal ballots from being cast. And I'd be more than happy to cooperate with them on that. So thank you for your questions and raising your points. And I look forward to evaluating the names you've identified and giving you feedback and updating you on that.
Thank you for that. And it is true that it is hard to obtain accurate information because a lot of this information is protected.
I didn't answer your question. Actually, dates of birth. Yeah, sorry. We have 5 different commercial date of birth vendors, each of whom has a confidence code that they use to determine the likelihood of that date of birth being accurate. We then applied our own level of scrutiny to that to do our very best to obtain what is we believe to be an accurate birth date. And I would say that in the research I cited on the uniqueness of names, dates, and dates of birth, it says that it's accurate up to 99.6. I've also in the same research found that NCOA is a valid method for identifying dead wood. So I rely on that research and the methods we have. And again, I've given this data to the state. They are the best arbiters and ultimate arbiters of it. I really just want them to give it the scrutiny it deserves. So again, I thank you for your questions.
And I do have one more final question. I'm sorry. I do have one more final question, Mr. Chair.
Representative Nguyen, we're going to move on. Representative Turner.
Thank you.
Really quickly, thank you for coming back to me. The Representative Nguyen's findings going to people's houses and knocking on doors and making phone calls. Obviously, that isn't going to happen on a wide scale, but there are ways for commercial addresses with the issue where there's a FedEx at the bottom and an apartment building at the top. There's a flag called CMRA or Commercial Mail Receiving Agencies, where a PO box is in the postal service, even if it's recorded on a voter data as being an apartment number, the CMRA is going to indicate that it's actually a PO box at the FedEx facility downstairs as opposed to an apartment upstairs. In your data, did you look at that particular flag? Was that one of the things that you looked at to determine where those folks actually lived, or if it was a an actual
We
PO
used a
box?
couple of different analyses, and we also actually looked at other just commercial residences or commercial locations that would not likely be residences. But that's a question that I actually have to pull the material up and I have to talk to some of my staff that I worked with on this project. So I'd be happy to answer that one subsequently.
I would look forward to that. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. We're going to kind of move into a quick at ease recess for about 10 minutes, and which we'll come back and begin with the next presenter if they'd be ready a few minutes ahead of time. Mr. Smith, is that acceptable?
Yes, it would be, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, we'll suspend until 10:50, and then we'll get started back again.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.